This is Tommy's Outdoors 100. Folks, 100 episodes of Tommy's Outdoors. This is the 100th episode. And for the past 3 years, every second Wednesday episode was published. Actually, not every second Wednesday. It was on many occasions I was pumping episodes every week. I think the longest was a time span for like 6 weeks when I was publishing episode every single week. But the usual schedule is every second week, every second Wednesday. Last 3 years, never missed one. Yeah. So it's a milestone today. And I have a story for you about this episode, about episode 100. But before I share the story, I would like to thank you first to all the guests on the podcast. Thank you for your time. Thank you for accepting my invitations. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your views and your opinions and spending time talking with me. And especially special thanks to all those guests who were, especially in the beginning of the podcast, like inside first 20 episodes. I greatly appreciate your support, and I greatly appreciate your confidence in me and in the podcast. Secondly, big thank you to all of you, dear listeners. Thank you. Without you, this whole thing wouldn't be worth doing. So thanks for watching, first for listening. Thanks for your time, and thank you for all the engagement, all the messages, all the comments, all the shares, all those things. You know, this is great, and it really sometimes makes my day when I hear from you. So please keep coming the comments and keep coming messages and all that. It's greatly appreciated. I just love it. So big thank you. 100 episodes, and now a short story about this episode 100. You know, as the number 100 was approaching, a lot of you messaged me and sent me private messages or emails saying like, hey, what do you plan for 100? You know, you planning something special? What's going to be on 100? And this started to mount like a pressure, like an expectation that there's going to be something extra in 100. And for a short moment of time, I was thinking that I'm going to do that. But then I even thought like, you know, that would mean that I was not giving 100% on all the previous episodes, right? Like all of a sudden, episode 100 is like super special. What does it mean that all the previous episodes I was not really trying? So I always try to give you and deliver the best episodes, the best experience, talk to best guests, most interesting people, talk about the most interesting subjects. So that would be like, you know, I can't do any better for 100 because I already trying to do my best. So I decided that 100, yes, it's a milestone. It's great, but it's going to be like another episode, like any other episode. And then Ashley Glover reached out to me. Ashley Glover, he's a outdoorsman, conservationist, axe thrower. And he's also a listener. He is a fan of the podcast. So we had a chat on the phone, and then we had another chat on the phone. And that actually was his idea that we could do the episode where we're going to talk about subjects that were already talked about in previous episodes of the podcast. And that will be an opportunity to kind of summarize 100 episodes. And maybe for people who are new to the podcast or did not listen to all the previous episodes, they can pick out some interesting episodes from the past and either discuss these subjects or Ashley will comment on them. And I thought that's a great idea. That's a great idea for episode 100. Kind of look back at the previous 100 episodes and look back at maybe not the whole 100 episodes, but kind of look at the most interesting subjects from Ashley's perspective. So that was a decision. We're going to do episode 100, do this kind of like a summary. And although the episode is titled Deer, Sheep, and Fires, it really should be titled Deer, Sheep, Boar, Wolves, Mink, Trout, Woodland, Rhododendron, Fishing, Fires. You got the idea. We just went to the town with all these discussions, and during the podcast, I did try to do the good job of mentioning the numbers of the episodes. So while you're listening or watching this podcast, maybe have a piece of pen and paper, and you can write down the numbers of the episode that you might find interesting. And you say like, well, I'm gonna come back and listen to the back catalog of 100 episodes of Tommy's Outdoors. So this is an introduction to this episode 100. And as usual, before I let you enjoy this episode of the podcast, folks, if you like what I do, if you're still with me after 100 episodes, and if you like to support me and the podcast, the best way you can do that is share the podcast with your friends. Share the podcast with people who follow you on social media, or send them email and say like, hey, this is Tommy's Outdoors podcast, tommysoutdoors.com. You might find it interesting. Share the episode. And also, if you want to go an extra mile, leave the comment, leave the review, leave the thumbs up, leave the 5-star rating. Every platform has it differently. Apple has it differently. Spotify I think doesn't have anything. YouTube, you can leave the comments. So leave the comments, share the podcast. This is great help for me, and this is great help for the podcast, and really gives me energy to record more episodes and go to 200. So yeah, that's it for this introduction. Once again, thanks for being with Tommy's Outdoors for the past 100 episodes. And now, without any further ado, Deer, Sheep, and Fires with Ashley Glover. Ashley, welcome to the show. It's a special episode and special guest.
Hey, pleased to meet you, Tommy. Looking forward to this session. I'm doing a bit of a review of everything that you've been dealing with over the last, I suppose, year or so.
Yeah, listen, and I appreciate your feedback and your all the conversation that we had. But before we jump into all of this, you can throw an axe, right? Are you like a best thrower in the 6th in the world? Third?
I'm okay. Axe throwing is not a big thing in Ireland. So our team is a bit of the kind of Jamaican bobsleigh team of timber sports. But yeah, we're doing okay. We're standing up well against the Swedes, the Germans, the Canadians. They have a heritage in throwing.
It was the first time when I talked with you. It was the first time I heard the term timber sports. So can you tell me?
Yeah.
What are the timber sports?
So timber sports would include any kind of lumberjack sports. So axe throwing is just one. A lot of them would be standing block, where you stand on a block of wood and chop through it. It's a speed sport. And there's other ones where you climb and put in effectively a scaffold plank. And then go up and then cut.
I've seen that.
One, yeah. And then there's a huge amount of chainsaw sports.
Wow.
And then there's other areas like it kind of brings you into the whole area of guide sports, which would be things like canoe racing or distance fly casting, or kettle boil, where you're given an axe, a block of wood, and a match, and it's whoever boils a pint of water the quickest. So there's a lot of those kind of heritage sports. A lot of them come out of Canada or Scandinavia. Log rolling would be a popular one. I got to send you some videos of my buddy who's 7-time Canadian log rolling champion.
Oh man,
might be another idea for
these are one of those sports
podcast.
that many people saw the snippets probably somewhere in a TV.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is and this is, so these are timber sports. And is it like a distance casting of, because I know about this like a distance casting, I guess like a regular rig, or not the rig, but the weight that you're fishing from the beach, like a beach casting something.
Yeah, well,
folks are doing this on the field. It's like, oh, this looks pretty strange.
Yeah, this would be on the lake. So traditionally, I suppose the guides from Canada would meet once a year and have like a guide competition where all the things that you do as a canoe and fishing guide and hunting guide in northern Canada they'd get together and they'd compete on the skills that you need to be a guide.
Wow.
So that was where I suppose a lot of that originated, and that tradition is still, although maybe there's less guides now, but it's still a tradition that's upheld. Axe throwing is huge in Scandinavia. So there's a lot of competitions, a lot of local clubs, slightly different profile. A lot of the axe throwing clubs that we visited in Sweden have been, older people, the equivalent of going to a lawn bowls club in Ireland. Whereas in Germany, it's more like going to a biker clubhouse. The kind of traditional idea, if you think of an axe thrower maybe with a big beard and a lot of tattoos, that's more a lot of the German and maybe some of the English clubs. We're quite mixed in our club. Some come from a hunting, fishing background, outdoors kind of background. Others come from more fitness, jiu-jitsu or fitness instructors, that type of background. But yeah, we have a good club, about 20 odd members in Wicklow.
How did that started? Whose idea was it?
Oh, there's a guy, Matthias in Newtown, that imported, I believe, the first throwing axe into Ireland. So there's only a couple of forges in the world that make the throwing axes, 2 in Sweden.
So this is not like any old axe.
No, it's a special throwing axe. It's properly weighted for throwing. So Matthias imported one of those, and he gave a few of his buddies a call and said, "Hey, come around and throw an axe." And we were like, "Yeah, let's try that." So then, of course, we all had to go out and buy our own axes. And that's how Wicklow.
This is how it goes.
Yeah,
right?
that's how it goes.
Wow,
so then,
look at that.
so then Wicklow Axe Throwers was born, and myself, a bushcraft instructor called Heath Dawson, and a fitness instructor called Kelly Lynch, and one of my fishing and hunting buddies, Lee Standing, got together, and we said, "Oh, I wonder if there's any competitions." And it just so happened that just after we started throwing axes, there was the World Championships in Germany, just outside Frankfurt. They've got a huge range there, like purpose-built place. So we jumped on a plane and went to Germany, and I think we placed, I believe, something like 12th and 14th or 14th and 16th out of about 100, 150 competitors. And, we'd only really just started. So we thought, hey, we could be good at this.
Yeah.
And yeah, since we've competed in Scotland, we've competed in the UK National Championships, we've competed a couple of times in Sweden, and our best trip so far probably has been to Nova Scotia. We were supposed to be going to the European Championships in Switzerland this year, which would have been great. And we were due to go to the World Championships in Barrington, Nova Scotia, but that's because of COVID, that's been postponed a year. So yeah, we've got a bit more time to train to beat all those Canadian lumberjacks. So.
It's just like sounds like in my head, like the Irish is like a nation that should be involved in axe throwing, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a pretty good introduction, axe throwing. There you go. And you're talking to us from your boat, which is also awesome. Listen, man. So you've gone through a few episodes of my podcast, and you had some thoughts around that.
Yeah, I kind of thought, well, because it's coming up to the 100th episode, it might be worth taking a look back and a look forward. So a bit of a review. I'm coming at it from a Wicklow Uplands perspective, in that, a lot of the issues that you've covered from, hunting, fishing and conservation perspective really resonate with me. In Wicklow, we have particular issues. You're probably aware of them, and I know a lot of the podcasts have covered them. So we could maybe look into a few of those. I suppose the headline issues might be in the uplands is, rewilding, it's deer, it's sheep, it's rhododendron, it's, overall, I suppose, upland ecology, blanket bogs, stuff like that. And we could maybe run through a couple of those issues, some of the perspectives that other people have given. And then there are particular areas and particular podcasts that I just think were so awesome, like 95 with Martha talking about, the situation in. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that forest.
Yeah,
yeah, that one. Yeah. So, yeah, and then maybe we could also start, and again, maybe it might be worth looking at some of the areas that you didn't cover. And I know, I call it like episode 27.5, which is the kind of podcast controversy one where, there are some issues that people don't want to talk about. And why is that? And, I live in an area that I suppose it's a deer hotspot. We would, be in areas where there would be traditionally a lot of burning of the hillsides. And some of those issues people find it difficult to talk about. So
and listen, first of all, thanks for the feedback and thanks for the kind words. And everything that you just gone through is exactly what, there are hot topics that I like to talk about: hunting, fishing, deer management. This is all so, connected and kind of intertwined. So let's start with deer. And, maybe I'm going to kick off with my thoughts, and then you can kind of chime in and we get this conversation going from the, having some of the episodes in the background. And my thought that I would like to share is, kind of connected with deer hunting and rewilding in one. And people who follow, let's say, ecological news, there was a little bit discussion, or actually quite a lot of discussion recently in Ireland about wild boar that was released. All of a sudden, wild boar showed up somewhere, and we know that some, not some, but in general, people who are like Irish Wildlife Trust or people who are pro rewilding, they want bring boar back, which from hunting perspective would be great. Now there's many problems. Boar is listed as an invasive species for some reasons, maybe good reasons. And so how I'm going to tie this to deer, my thought was that we would need to, if we even talk about releasing boar, which again, it's like it says, people are not willing to talk about it. If we were to release boar, we would have to manage it. We would have to control it some way. No doubt, everywhere this is happening. And I figured that we don't even have a hunting organization, like an All Ireland Hunters NGO club, that could raise a hand and say like, hey folks, great idea, let's have a boar, and we're going to deal with controlling the numbers, right? There are a couple of organizations that deal with deer and solely deer, and then there's a National Parks and Wildlife Service, and then there are NGOs like Irish Wildlife Trust. And so I think, there's not this, the discussion, what was upsetting to me a little bit was that discussion was going around, hey, let's release boar, they're so great, there's all those ecological benefits. And even if you mention control and management, then you go straight away pushback. It's like, no, that will be failure if we need to build in, managing. And so, how is it going to happen? And my thought was like, there is no hunters organization that could come forward, meet the ecologists, meet the, rewilding people halfway and say, hey, let's do this together. That was my thought. In that somehow ties into deer, because we already have this problem with deer management, even though we have a number of organizations that supposed to deal with deer hunters. And so these were my thoughts. Wonder what are yours?
Well, I suppose I am interested in the whole area of wild boar and the opportunity to reintroduce wild boar. Actually, near where I live, I believe there have been some wild boar, although I debated, and I went up with an expert recently to look at the site. There was so much disturbance of the earth that it looked way bigger than badgers, but it's also an area where there's a lot of badgers, and we found lots of badger tracks, we found lots of evidence of badgers, and we found an area that looks like it's been dug up by wild boar. So I can't say whether there's wild boar or not definitively, But, I put game cams up there for a while, didn't find any wild boar. But again, that doesn't say anything. I believe if there are wild boar in areas like that, up in the hills here in Wicklow, it's because hunters have put them there and they're feeding them. I don't believe you can just dump wild boar up in the hills and not feed them, because they will come down into farms and they'll be shot. So I think it's, whenever wild boar appear, and you know where they have appeared in the Dublin Mountains, the Wicklow Mountains a few times, down around Scariff in East Clare, they've always been found and shot almost immediately. I don't believe there's a wild population living anywhere really. And I suppose, you've dealt it in a couple of episodes. I think, I'm looking through the notes there. Episode 97 and 78 looked at a lot of these issues around human wildlife conflict. And I think while the rewilders and the hunters would welcome wild boar, I don't believe the farmers would. I'm not sure about the foresters. Actually, I believe wild boar can be pretty good for forestry. But you'd have to speak to the foresters about that. I'm not sure. There's not, like when we talk about reintroduction of wolves, and then I think about the Wicklow Mountains, there's very few places I can take you in the uplands where you can't see a house. Very few places. So, even though it at first glance looks very depopulated, there aren't that many areas that don't have roads running through it and don't have human habitation. So I'm not sure where the boar would be. There's nothing for them to eat in Quilcha Forestry. So they're not going to stay in there, and they're going to go on farms because that's where they're going to.
I think on that we can plug in episode 61 with Shane McAuliffe, who is a pig farmer, and I think obviously he was obviously involved quite a lot in the recent appearance of the boar. He was quite vocal. He was even on the radio show discussing this issue. But on episode 61, we talked about African swine fever.
Yeah,
and which boars are vector. And I think this is the biggest reason why farmers, especially pig farmers, would be pushing back like crazy, because what we talked about on this episode, there's a few big farmers in Ireland, and they're responsible for like a massive portion of the income on farming. And if, according to Shane, if we found the African swine fever in boar, then all those pig farms would be shut down. So that would be massive economical problem. Now, question is, like, we clearly have some boar in Ireland, since every now and then and popping here and there. So are these in the private collections, or like what is it? Do you know? Because then
I believe it's just hunters release them.
But where did they get them from?
They get them probably from the UK and put them in the back of a truck, put them on the ferry, and release them in their area, or an area that they have.
But is it it's illegal?
Again, I don't
right?
know. It's illegal, yeah, but they don't suddenly magically appear. Now I know sometimes, certainly this has happened in the past, because I know of one example where a kid in the local village got what was thought to be a small pet Vietnamese pot-bellied pig or whatever, a mini pig, a handbag pig, if you like. And it wasn't. It was a huge. It just grew and grew, and it obviously couldn't live in a semi-D. So they released it into the farm across the way, and over time, that pig, because I used to see it, it used to hang out with the horses in the local equestrian centre. That pig grew and grew, and people started feeding it, and it grew and it grew, and they become hairy after a while. So it actually looked like, the first time I saw it, I was with my dog, and my dog started running towards it, and I was like, oh, it's a wild boar. And then I asked around locally, and they went, no, that was a pet pig that was released, and it just looks like a wild boar. Now
it's surprising, like a pig, because they're the same species, right? So scruffa, there's the same species, like a pink domestic pig and a wild boar is the same species, and it's surprising. I haven't never seen this in my own eyes, but I heard that from number of sources that if you cut loose like a regular pink pig, you couldn't believe how quickly it starts to change its, external appearance. It starts to look like a boar, essentially.
Yeah, and I think there would be, like, obviously there's a lot of farms that have a couple of pigs just for their own use. And one of my buddies keeps a few pigs, and it's on a deer permission of mine. And those pigs are always trying to escape. In fact, I have found them out of the pens, and they only go back because they're getting fed there. But, if they found food somewhere else, they wouldn't come back to the pen. So they are amazing at escaping because they just have such power. And, trying to fence them in, you need bars to keep pigs in. Normal kind of deer fencing type setup doesn't hold back pigs. They can dig, they can push. And if there's a few of them, they really will go for it. So I don't believe that all of the releases maybe have been intentional releases, for recreational hunters. I'm guessing some of them are just pigs that have escaped. I don't believe there are kind of wild boar farms in Ireland that would have, releases. I don't think it's like the mink issue, but again, I it's not an area I know that much about, but I have kind of, like just in the back of my mind, I know a couple of sites in Wicklow where there have been boar shot and in Scariff. So there have been releases of some sort. They don't just magically appear.
Yeah. Let's switch gear and talk about deer. What's the deal with deer in Wicklow right now?
Yeah, so
how bad is it?
How good or how bad is it? Yeah, I think as you know, and it's been covered. Deer's been covered in a lot of the podcasts. I speak to Damien from the Irish Deer Commission a lot. I believe you're going to have Dr. Ruth on in the future talking about
we're working on it.
Oh, she's really keen. She's just finishing a paper at the moment, and then she says,
I know
you're first on her call list.
It's always something on our so this is like, for people who listen to that, what you can expect in the next 100 episodes. So
she's awesome. So what we've done recently with the Irish Deer Commission is we've put in a few FOIs. I suppose I have a little bit of a background in lobbying and I know a little bit about FOI and a little bit about mapping, a little bit about data. So
can you decipher for listeners what is FOI?
Yeah, freedom of information requests. So you can put in environmental information requests and you can put in FOI requests. And one of my, I suppose, problems with the information that is actively published on things like deer or sheep or fires or flood relief or whatever it might be, the threats to biodiversity, that a lot of the data isn't published actively. So you have to really go digging for it. And so if you want to get, I don't know, the minutes from all the meetings on gorse fires responses, or you want all the reports that have been, all the deer management reports that have been written in the last 10 years, you have to do an FOI request. And FOI requests, there are some discussions about reform of the FOI Act, but at the moment it's a painful process. I think it's fair to say, anyone that's done it, it's not supposed to be this difficult, but I suppose it often turns into a battle, and the information you often get back is so redacted that, you've probably seen FOI documents that come back, they're just like black pen across the whole document.
Wow. So
they give you the document, but not in a format that you can actually tell anything from it. So there's a bit of work to be done on transparency. The honest answer is, from our recent FOIs on deer, is that only one of the national parks has a deer management plan, and that's Donegal. That was done in 2017. There is nothing for Wicklow, and as you're probably aware, between 40 and 50% of the deer in Ireland are in Wicklow. So there is no deer management plan for Wicklow. There are a couple of deer management pilot projects in Wicklow run by the Uplands Council, and there are a number of private landowners like Lord Meath that would have active deer management on in their forestry and in their lands.
Are they doing anything? Is there any plan for Killarney?
Again, the FOI, basically you put in your FOI and you ask for the deer management plans. And they don't say there is no plan for Killarney, no plan for Wicklow. They just say no records are found. So you can't say there's definitely not, but along the way, we've also spoken to people like Tim that do the deer management plans, and it doesn't appear that there's anything other than the ones that we've received. So currently, I suppose Ireland has one plan just for Donegal that is, somewhat dated. If you think the context of, recent couple of years with COVID, the restrictions on hunting, the restaurants have been closed. When the restaurants are closed, there's no deer poaching. Because there's no ready market for the meat. So they're just, I know from being in the hills, the places that you would normally see and hear deer poaching, there just hasn't been. Because, if you're a deer poacher, where can you sell the meat? You can only, put a couple of deer in your freezer, and that's
hang on a second. So you say like you go and you hear deer poaching. So is it like, it sounded like it's just like business, like every day someone goes and poaching deers?
In some parts of the uplands, you would hear a lot of shots at night. Yeah.
And who's supposed to do something about it and doesn't do anything then? That's a logical question.
Yeah, there is. And actually, it's one of the things we could get to in the end. There is a new Garda Wildlife Crime Unit been set up. And that will be, as far as I'm aware, addressing anti-poaching. So it may be something that's coming, but at the moment, it wouldn't be something that's very resourced. So anti-poaching, and that's not just deer poaching. That would be overall wildlife crime, whether it's out of season burning, whether it's sea trout poaching, which is an issue where I live.
Or salmon poaching.
Yeah. We don't have that many salmon, and the salmon tend to run in the rivers near us. They would run very close to kind of Christmas time, and much more difficult to poach. The poaching and there's not so many of them. Poaching tends to be more around sea trout in Wicklow.
Oh, in Wicklow.
Yeah, because
I'm looking for the number of the episode, because I have an episode on deer poaching. I'm just looking for an episode number. I think it was 51, if I remember correctly. And apparently, this is a huge problem with salmon poaching.
It's definitely
51 for people listening. Yeah. Episode 51, fighting illegal salmon netting with Bertie Brosnan.
Yes,
that was. Oh man, I was listening to that. I was not listening. I was recording and then listening while producing that, and it was like so upsetting. I think their upsetting thing is like that. This is so much politics going into that you're almost, you can't have open discussion. It's like, hey, what's up, right? Do you like fishery board? Do you need more money? Do we need a GoFundMe policy? Campaign to raise some money for that. I'm sure anglers would do it.
Yeah, well, Tommy, the best thing for stopping poaching in your local river is to fish on your local river, because there's nobody netting a pool when you're fishing it, right?
Well, apparently, dogs were shot and cars were burned.
Yeah, so, no, absolutely.
In Poland, I said on this episode, like in Poland, there, I don't know how much situation changed for better or for worse, but back in the days, even in the angling magazines, there were, articles about stretches of the rivers that are, anglers are advised to avoid because there are poachers there. And this is like just an organized crime. There are criminals. They're there to grab fish as so it's like, if you're fishing on that river, better avoid this place. And I said it on 51, and Bertie goes like, Tommy, the same thing goes on in Ireland. Which it was like, whoa, I didn't know that.
I definitely, I don't think it's organized crime like that. There are just lads that have, like where we are, maybe third, fourth generation poachers, and they believe it's their right to net a river. And if you net, they wouldn't be obviously conservation minded. So if you're netting the larger spawning fish, particularly at the beginning and end of season when the big fish are coming up, and you're killing a lot of those fish, it does have an impact, obviously over time on the river. Now, sea trout are they're fairly resilient because they're not all in the river at the same time. So there'll be ones out at sea, there'll be ones coming up, there'll be ones way upstream that are individual fish in one small puddle, really. And they're not, no one's going to be netting those. So they can survive. And arguably, the bigger threat to the rivers is the state. It's, like the 2 big fish kills in our river have been, we don't know exactly who did it, but they've come from, the local water treatment plant. So, you got to put poaching in perspective. I think if you look at what's been happening on the East Coast, the East Coast River Trust has been set up, and it's basically to give rivers a voice, I suppose, and a legal standing, so that if there is a threat, like there was a threat to the Forestry River in Wicklow because Irish Water were looking at repairing a lot of the water treatment works, which would mean that more water would be not extracted from, but less water would be in the river. And because they were repairing a lot of leaks in dams and in the water infrastructure. And obviously, if the water level drops, the temperature goes up, less oxygen, it has an impact on the ability for the sea trout to spawn. So I think there's a number of issues facing migratory fish. We can talk probably for the rest of the day on sea lice and salmon farms. It's actually, just in passing, that's I've almost always agreed with everything all of your guests have said, apart from the guy that said it was okay to buy farm salmon. I have to disagree with him. I feel quite strongly that, I think we need to address the fish farming issue, because just, like I was in Connemara last week and caught a couple of sea trout, and you can just see, the size is small, the amount of them coming up is small, and they're just covered in lice. They have to get up to try and get rid of the lice, and the lice is coming from those big factory farms. So I think that needs better regulation. It's been well covered in the media this week, actually. There's been 3 pieces on it. There's definitely a body of work to be done on anti-poaching, but there are also bigger issues that I think the state is kind of culpable of in protecting river and water courses.
It's always upsetting that it takes, like, I'm going back now to this the wildlife crime unit. It just takes years. It just takes years of talking and promising and committing to this and that, and then 3-4 years in, it all turns out to be a tick box exercise. It's like, oh yeah, we have a wildlife crime unit where, this is this guy there in the corner, right? It's like, and there's a guy who will be there anyway, some guard who has 25 other jobs to do, and they just added one more bullet point to his job description: wildlife crime unit. Now it's yours, right? And the dude's is like, yeah, okay, I guess I'm a wildlife crime officer now.
Yeah, we had a good episode one Sunday morning where, at the same time, a couple of lads from our local angling conservation club arrived on a bridge where there were lads netting just below the bridge, and they'd cut the gate into the field and driven in, and they were loading the nets and the fish into the back of the car. So they took off across the field. 2 guards arrived, and one of the guards, as a young guy, took off his jacket and started running after the guys in the wetsuits across the field. And he came back. They never found the nets, actually. But you have to find the nets and the fish really at the same time to get a prosecution. But he was saying, I really love this. This is so much better than doing traffic stops on the N11, So I think you would get guards that actually, do want to get engaged with wildlife crime and do, understand the impact on biodiversity. So maybe over time that will change. Actually, just as an add-on to that story, I followed through then the route that the lads had followed down the river and across the local farmers' fields. And I had my Springer with me, and I believe he's the only Springer that's ever flushed a sea trout, because the first ditch we got to, he came out with a 3-pound sea trout in his mouth.
Lovely. Uh, that guard who took his jacket and started running, he needs to be promoted, man.
Yeah,
Like we
definitely.
need this is it, right? If you see the people who are passionate and are like doing stuff, this is so critical to encourage them and promote them, and it's like, yeah, this is great. This is what we need, man.
Yeah. So, like, I suppose going back to deer
Mm.
and deer management, we've got three kind of key stakeholders in Wicklow. You'd have Quilcha, which has all the plantations, which, provides no food for the deer, but provides, I suppose, the cover and the shelter. You've got the Uplands, which is Parks and Wildlife. And then you've got the private woodland and farms and forestry. And you probably understand the way Quilcha works from deer, that you join a deer syndicate, you bid for an auction for a piece of Quilcha forestry to shoot in, you do your HCAP or whatever, and then you're supposed to do a return of how many deer you culled and so on. But I suppose the reality is, I know a lot of guys in those syndicates, and, how much active shooters are in those clubs. A lot of the guys are in pheasant clubs or other game clubs, and, generally only a percentage of them are deer stalkers. Only a percentage of them are active. Chatting to one of my buddies recently who's in a syndicate, and he was going, yeah, we've got about 30 people in our kind of game club. About 10 of them have deer rifles. 2 of them were out this year. Now, this year is maybe less than normal years, and between them, they shot 1 hind. That's it. And that's a massive area of Wicklow. So there is probably a resourcing issue there.
You mean in terms like there's not enough hunters? I mean, like this is
interesting.
Yeah.
Or they're getting older.
This is interesting.
It's an aging population of hunters, so they can't be up.
You see, so this is very interesting, because this is something that I talk a lot, and I even recently was talking with one of the people involved in deer management, and I said, like, well, we know there's this problem with hunter recruitment and so on, and whether you talk about with what's the name, Deer Alliance, I think they're HCAP people, right? They're Deer Alliance. Or you talk about with NRIGC, they will go, oh, number of hunters going up, we have more applications, and year in year National Parks and Wildlife Service issuing more deer hunting licenses. And so when you talk with people involved in that, you have this picture like we have more and more hunters and everybody is hunting, and there's more HCAP certificates, and there's more deer hunting licenses on one hand. But then on the other hand, it's like as far as I'm concerned, common knowledge that the hunter recruitment is down, young people not going into hunting, like young people not going into outdoors in general, right? PlayStation is probably more compelling to them. And I think there's less and less. So I curious what's your opinion. Where is that discrepancy? Where it's coming from? That on one hand there's like more license issued, more HCAP certified, and all that, but then on the other hand there's like how what's the average age of a deer hunter?
Yeah, like I live in a deer hotspot. I know most of the deer hotspots in Wicklow, and I know what a hunter's Jeep looks like. I know where they would park. You just don't see that many people out. Now, this year has been maybe exceptional because of COVID and the restrictions, and so people weren't out. But in the I'm talking about over the last 17 years. I've lived in the same place, so there doesn't appear to be, certainly in recent years, a large amount of new hunters coming into the sector. The numbers maybe on how many sales into game dealers and all might tell you a little bit more information. We can check that, but yeah, I'm just anecdotally not seeing it. And, chatting to people that live in, right on the edges of, the big hunting and the big poaching areas, they're just not hearing the shots. And I know, moderators and thermals and all those kind of things. And people say, oh, it's because, all deer are being shot at night now and you just don't see it, you don't hear it. And I'm like, I absolutely would. you know, when you're living there, you know what's going on. You just, because, you know, there's only so many places that people can park the Jeeps. So you would notice it. And I'm in the hills a lot. So I think there are less people, again, anecdotally getting out, but, you know, one of the things maybe is worth going back to FOI, is worth doing some FOIs on, is about, you know, the number of Section 42s that have been issued, where they've been issued, that sort of
for deer.
For deer,
or in general.
Well, for deer, we can talk about seals separately. For deer, I think it's worth a look. And actually, sections are for other things as well, as you probably know. There is probably very valid reasons if you have a sensitive watercourse that you need to look at, you know, controlling the seabirds that may be predating that watercourse. So.
Like cormorants.
Exactly, like cormorants. So there are other reasons why maybe sections from a biodiversity perspective are an important thing. Cormorants are not something I know that much about, but again, I have seen them in places that really they, you know, ideally they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be in, you know, but like
they wouldn't be because they normally would be different in different places, but because the environment was changed and everything, that's where they moved. Because this is one of the things that I, you know, and you said that you don't know much about it, but you know, we can, neither do I. You probably know more than I do, but it's like, well, you know, like how if the cormorants are coming in and they like decimating population, then my question is like, did they always done that, or is it you know, something else upstream in the ecosystem is screwed up?
That's my feeling. It's something else in the ecosystem, you know. But that same place that I'm thinking of has a large population. I think there's only something like 24 breeding pairs in the country of goosander ducks. But the hill above that has got a lot of peregrines, and you know, there's going to be like, you know, a lot of those goosander chicks are going to get predated, because one of my buddies saw a peregrine come down and take an adult mallard off that lake recently. It was just a lot of squawking, a lot of feathers, and you know, the relative sizes of those birds, it was pretty impressive to see. And yeah, so with a small population of goosanders and peregrines, there's going to be a conflict, and no one's going to be suggesting that you control the peregrine population. Same with otters, you know. Same with pine martins. Well, pine martins probably cause as much impact on a sea trout river as mink.
Oh, really?
But yeah, probably. Now there's not as many of them, and you know, nobody's going to suggest that you control the pine martin population.
Some already suggested that.
It's illegal to remove or rehouse.
Oh yeah, I know.
Pine martin. But yeah, we would have, you know, like I had a call recently because there was 5 mink in one pool, a whole family, 2 adults and 3 kits on a pool on a sea trout river near me. In one pool, 5 mink. That's a lot of mink. And you know, if that river wasn't managed and the mink weren't trapped, then obviously, you know, they're going to have a significant impact if that population.
Are these all mink are they escapees, or are they all?
They'd be escapees. There used to be a mink farm in Wicklow. Yeah. So
okay. Because I know that there was a, you know, smarties animal rights activists. They set free some.
Whether the releases were by mink just escaping, or whether they were released, I suppose we'll never know. It's probably, my guess is it's a little bit of both, but they like, you know, they're one of the critters that really thrive in Wicklow.
Really?
So mink have done pretty good.
And is it trapping going on for mink?
The angling conservation clubs would do a bit of trapping, or they'd shoot them when they see them. I believe they shoot and trap in Kilcool in the bird sanctuary and for the terns and so on. They certainly shoot the foxes and the grey crows and other predators for the conservation there. But yeah, mink would obviously, kill everything on the river. I believe otters don't predate mink, but they will stop them from breeding because they would predate the kits probably. So I think having an otter will move on the mink. But I've caught sea trout where the sea trout has basically been almost dead when I've caught it, and either that was because it was just being continually chased around the pool all day, but I've also seen fish being caught where their whole side was eaten off, just a huge piece out of the side of the fish, and we put down traps and caught mink at that pool. So you can't.
People probably saw that video of mink catching a duck, a mallard or something.
Yeah, they'll catch duck, they'll catch mice, voles, pretty frogs, anything that moves pretty much
and
on
just
the
for
river. They
people
are an
listening to
predator.
that, mink is American mink. They're not supposed to be here.
They're not supposed to.
So in other words,
they're not supposed to be here. Yeah.
So in other words, animals, native animals never evolved coping mechanism to deal with this predator. So just want to throw it out there for people who listening to this, like, oh my god, they want to kill poor mink. Like, no.
I don't believe there is a state program. I don't believe Parks and Wildlife or IFI actively trap mink.
No,
I think it's just local angling conservation clubs that do it, or individual farmers, or anybody that keeps chickens, for example, would trap mink. But there's probably just not much data on, like everything else. If there's no data on it, and it's the problem hasn't been articulated, then we just don't know what size the problem is of mink, and it's probably quite localized as well.
Mm-hmm. That's an idea for the next episode about mink.
I think mink is a good one to look at. Yeah.
Can we come back to deer and Wicklow? Like, what are the impacts on deer? Like, of deer? Like, how do you see this played out? Is it heading towards inevitable catastrophe with elephant eaten by deer? Or
one of the things, like, you definitely see in the hillside a lot of tubes, those forestry tubes, and you see a lot of deer fencing, and they're things that you get grants for. So you don't get a grant for doing deer management per se, but you get grants for building forest roads and putting in tubes and putting in fences. And I don't know how you would get the science on this, but what I've seen, again, from nearly 20 years of observation in the hills, if you put in a new plantation of forestry and you put it all in tubes and then you fence off the whole thing, what's that going to do to the deer population? It's going to increase the deer population in the surrounding existing woodland. And so my experience of, when
is it going to increase the population, or is it just going to increase the density?
No, it'll increase the density in those places. The population is probably increasing anyway, realistically.
30% a year.
We have, I was chatting to Paddy Purser, who's one of the local foresters, recently, and I was saying, I can take you to 6 herds at the moment that I know that are probably, more than 400 deer in a herd. And, if you speak to Damien or somebody that would know Kerry quite well, he'd go, well, a big herd down here might be 15 deer. And I'm going, there's just massive Sika herds here. Huh. I was up near Derrybone the other day, and there were 150 on one hillside. And I was just out hiking, looking. One of my hobbies is collecting shed antlers. So I came down behind the herd, and it's always, for collecting shed antlers, you're better to be above, because you can look down and you can see where they are, and they kind of glint, you get your eye in. So as I went down, obviously the herd pushed into the gorse below. When the herd came out the other side, it had nearly doubled. And then it went into the woodland behind. Now, I couldn't see when it came out the other side, but I know how many are in that woodland. You're probably talking on that one hillside, 400 plus deer. Now, if you have a piece of forestry near there, it's, there's going to be zero regeneration of that forestry. And it's because there's no obligation on those landowners to have a deer management plan. And it becomes more difficult because you've got the 3 stakeholders. You've got the private in that area, there's a large private estate that appears to have no deer management. There is Parks and Wildlife above, which again, we don't know what the deer management is in Parks and Wildlife in Wicklow, but there's a lot of deer in the uplands. Anyone who goes over Sally Gap or Wicklow Gap or down to Glenmalure can tell you. And then there's all the quilcha around, which on paper have deer syndicates managing the deer in those. But again, anecdotally, you just don't know. People fill out forms, there's no tags.
Actually, a couple of questions. Like when you're walking on a mountain and you're looking at deer, looking up deer, hunting, shed hunting. Let's say, how many miles you do in a day?
Oh, I move slowly. And I zigzag. I'm a bit like a Springer Spaniel on the hill. That's. But
just on average, how many?
Yeah, maybe 10 miles or 15 miles, something like that. I would tend to go, the area where you see the most wildlife, and actually there's less and less places like this, are the places that are furthest away from human habitation. They are generally not quilcha and not Parks and Wildlife. So if you take a map of the boundaries of the park, that's got really the least amount of biodiversity. You'll find sika, you'll find badgers. That's about it. Quilcha, it provides cover, but not really much in the way of habitat. So generally, if you find me up in the hills, I'll be trespassing. I'm on private estates because that's where the best biodiversity is. That's where the best woodland is. If you want to see native oak, you've got to go really into a private estate. There are some examples, some maybe exceptions where the state has private woodland that would be, I suppose, heritage woodland. But a lot of it's been looked after by individuals, and yeah, it's under pressure. It's really the small remnants of it.
So the next question is like this this fenced and plastic tubed forestry. This is Sitka's plantation, right? These are not native trees.
Yeah, or it could be like there's increasingly now there are groups that get together and they raise some money and they get an IT company to sponsor it and they will plant and they'll put it inside tubes and they'll put it inside a fence. But they often won't have a deer management plan that you or I would understand. And often it's not written down and it's basically just, kind of hoping that everything doesn't get eaten by a deer. As you may be aware, I spend a lot of time around deer fences. Deer go under fences. They don't go over fences generally.
Mm-hmm. Really?
So they'll just, I've watched them often, you'll see them, they hit the fence, they follow down along the fence because the grass is greener the other side of the fence. So they'll follow it down. They'll find a place where a rabbit or a fox or something has gone under. The hind will put her nose under it, push it up onto her shoulder and just wriggle like a salmon underneath the fence. And, the fence posts are far enough apart that you can just hold the fence and hold it up. You can get under them usually yourself. So deer have worked that out over time.
That's why deer fences suck.
Yeah, I think deer fences suck because they're protecting, even if it's, done with the right will in the world and it's, broadleaf planting and all that, it's still a farm of broadleaf trees. It's not naturally regenerating. Often it's not appropriate for the soil conditions and there's other issues that, people try and put trees because they go, I want to have ash, I want to have oak, I want to have, these heritage trees. So they get a field, they buy a field, they fence it and they put those trees in tubes inside that. My theory, and again, this is kind of, I suppose, what we'd be trying to do with the Rivers Trust and some of the other conservationists talking about, if you're going to plant along the watercourses. One of the things you may be aware of is hinged willow.
Oh, no.
Have you come across this idea? So, we had some guys over from the UK trout conservation groups before doing some reporting on the rivers in Wicklow. And one of the things that works very well is planting willow along the riverbanks and then hinging it. So willow, as you know, grows very fast and you basically cut it, let it fall into the watercourse, but don't cut all the way through.
Yeah.
And it provides it stabilizes the bank, which is great, but it also provides fantastic habitat for the fish and, you know, other critters along the bank. So yeah, I think planting along watercourses is better. You get more bang for your buck than doing these standalone fields. And you don't need to, you know, worry so much about the, you know, the fencing off these individual fields. And you know, if you look at, particularly if you choose a field that's in the middle of a kind of quilcher area or a deer hotspot, you're just going to be fighting a losing battle with that. It's a very difficult proposition to try and, you know, restore or start a native woodland. What I'd like to see more work done on is protecting what we've already got and, you know, starting to expand out from those. So looking and mapping, this is why I've got interest in GIS recently, trying to map where the existing remnants of woodland are and then starting to build out from them. And often they are on watercourses. You know, if you look at some of the good spots, you know, up around the Avonmore, Glenmacnass and so on, there's definitely opportunities, I think, to do that. You're not coming in conflict with farmers because there's, you know, along the watercourse, there isn't, you know, you can't farm that. And you're getting the benefit of improving the watercourse as well as improving the woodland. So yeah, my theory is that that's a better approach.
And that probably, we also, you know, I'm just coming back to these forestries, then, you know, it's always bugs me, this, like you said, plastic tubes, like more, let's put more plastic onto.
Yeah, and I believe, and again, I've been looking into this recently, I believe the rules aren't that you have to take the plastic tubes away. So I can take you to loads of woodlands that the whole floor of the forest is covered in these plastic tubes because you get a grant to put up the fence, build the forest road, do all blah, 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 but nobody then comes back and takes the tubes away. So I'm kind of thinking maybe, and I don't know how this would work, that when you get funding, particularly if it's state funded, to put tubes in, that each tube has your unique identifier on it, your air code or the name of your forestry contractor or whatever it is. So then
you
have to be taken away again.
Care of it.
When they break up, you know, when they're individual tubes, they're kind of easy enough to remove, but over time in the sun, they start to break down into this little shrapnel stuff and that gets into the soil. So long term, I think if they're not being removed, I think they're going to become a problem for those woodlands. You know, I just don't see how that, you know, if you let them break down into almost dust and they're all blowing around, how they're going to be collected. Unless there's a plan.
That's a problem. Listen, so just to wrap up the deer thing, I have a question for you about comments on the ratio of stags and hinds, and like, is that situation healthy or is it a problem?
Yeah, so I've been asking a couple of people, like I know you've had Adam and Killian on, and they're probably better to ask, but you know, I think it was Adam I was talking to about it recently, about the ratio. And it seems to be as simple as just the males just don't have the same survival instinct as the females.
There's this Twitter feed that says like why women live longer, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff.
I think it's the same with deer. So you probably know yourself when you approach in hunting season, when you approach a herd of deer, it's always the senior hind, the matriarch of the herd, that is always looking out for everyone. And she's the one that sees you, wins you first. And even when you've done everything right and there's no way she could have got your scent, she still knows you're there. She's looking, when you look up, she's looking straight at you, right? You've had this experience. So she's the one that looks after them. And at the same time, the males will stand, they'll go, oh, there's a bit of movement up there. I think I can smell something. And they will walk straight up to you.
Yes.
So I think there's a little bit of that, why the ratio is as it is. I'm not sure what the ratio is supposed to be, but I notice even in kind of the, you know, maybe the larger managed herds, like I was trying to do a little bit of a count there recently up on the Guinness estate, and I was kind of going, maybe out of, you know, 200 Sika on the valley floor, maybe a third were male, something of that, but that seemed a lot. Most times maybe 1 in 10, but it depends on the time of year.
Yeah.
And you see the huge herds in Wicklow of Sika hinds, but you don't see huge herds of males. And when you in the rut, you go to an area that maybe have, I think the most males I might see in one spot together might be 25, 30, something of that. But that's a lot. Like, that's bigger than most full herds in most counties.
Yeah. Do you think there's an element of that stags and males are more likely to be shot because of antlers? Let's not kid ourselves. A lot of hunters, they're after antlers. Not so
I don't
much.
know. Like, there is, like, certainly this year there's no kind of what you call tourist hunters, but I don't know how many tourist hunters come to Wicklow to shoot. And regular hunters, do they really,
they call trophy hunters.
Yeah, do they call for the heads? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are culling, like, if they're culling kind of, let's say semi-commercially to sell to the game dealer, then I think they're going for low-hanging fruit, what is, nearest to my Jeep.
That's for sure.
And then you will maybe get people that are, more into deer management, and there are, as there are some big estates that would have dedicated deer managers in Wicklow, and they would be managing the herd, according to what you would see as kind of more modern deer management, strategy. But in general, yeah, there's so many more hinds and in large densities.
So for folks who are again listening to that, to stay in the spirit of the recap, that's episode 73 with Ciaran when we talked about modeling of the population of animals, and episode 89 with Adam when we talked about monitoring animals and camera trapping and all that. They were pretty cool episodes.
I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what Ciaran and his team come up with in terms of the mapping. And the Smart Deer project, and what Wicklow looks like relative to other parts of the country. So I think that's towards the end of this year. We'll see some data coming out of UCD on deer, and that's the first project looking at, I suppose, taking all the legacy data and starting to look at what a framework could be for going forward. And I know probably Ruth's going to be talking to you about that on a Wicklow context, and thermal drones, and how you what modern deer management looks like. It's not just going around counting poos. So
yeah, for sure. Listen, man, I gotta drop that bomb now. So what about wolves, right? Let's just cut loose a bunch of wolves in Wicklow, and they're gonna sort out deer problem overnight. No?
Yeah, I don't see where they're going to go in Wicklow. So if somebody can, show me those wild places in Wicklow, I'd love to visit them. I just don't know where those places are. They're, there's just like, they're not going to sit up on the hillside in the national park. There's nothing there. There's no, there's really nothing for them. There's not even much in the way of shelter. There's certainly no woodland. I can't see them living in the Quilcha plantations. Maybe. So where are they going to live? In the surrounding farmland, in the the river valleys that come through. Maybe they could live in Devil's Glen or in Glenmalure, or in the Dargle coming down into Bray. I'm just not sure where they're going to live. I am, as I said earlier in relation to Boar, I can't think of many places where I can stand in the Wicklow Mountains and not see a house.
Mm-hmm. This is again a conversation that I had a couple of times on about wolves, and the whole argument is like, well, we just need to allow them to live, and they're gonna figure out they don't need like a massive wilderness area where there's no people and no phone reception. They will do just fine as long as we let them be. That's an argument anyway. I am not sure I understand that argument for sure, but then my response to that is always, do I really want this like semi-urbanized wolves. You know what I mean? Like, I would love to have wolves, but they're like a proper wild wolves that are live in the wilderness, rather than, yeah, they're gonna do just fine and they're gonna be sneaking, scavenging trash bins in the back of a Lidl at night and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure. And on top of that, even if we do that, there's going to be such a enormous amount of social conflict introduced together with wolves. Man, I hardly see this worth. I don't know. I'm sure many people would disagree with me, but it's a tough one.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think, from a Wicklow perspective, and I can't think of other areas of the country that, wouldn't face the same issues. I just can't see where there would be the habitat that would support a wild wolf population,
but
or
other
even
hand,
a
you
wild
said,
boar population.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, says there's like a ton of deer in Wicklow. Wouldn't it be just that you just start jumping on those deer?
Yeah, but like, where are those deer? They're in the surrounding farmlands, and so yeah, maybe I'm if somebody wants to go for it, absolutely, get the permissions and
that's the problem.
Do a release. But I think there's so many places in the world that you could do that type of rewilding with wolves.
Mm-hmm.
You see,
this is I think like one of the and again, I'm kind of building my knowledge as I do these episodes. I kind of building my knowledge by talking to people like yourself, like others. And I think that the one big thing, now I'm gonna do a little bit of like advocate for wolves, that a lot of objection is that they're going to be depredating livestock, and they're like, the wolf will take a sheep rather than chase a deer, which is wild, rather than they're going to go and kill a sheep, and so on and so forth. And then even like people listen to 95, where we talked about Białowieża and all that, like in Poland, like most of Europe, there are wolves, and it turns out that the major conflict with wolves is on pets, dogs, cats. This is really where the problem is, not with sheep. So I found it a little bit, like funny almost, that people who are, there's this narrative of the urban-rural divide, right? And like, people who live in urban areas, they want wolves because they don't have to deal with wolves, and then they're going to put the wolves back, and then farmers have to deal with them. And I find this funny, because if we ever get wolves in, it might turn out that those urban people will be dealing with more consequences of their cats and dogs being killed, rather than farmers with their sheep. So just a thought that it's not such a clear cut. And and that's where in 73, when I was talking with Cillian, it was so fascinating, the idea of trying to model that, to use the computer models and artificial intelligence to model how those populations will behave, what they're going to do. And as you get more data, you can feed into the model and refine the results. And you can actually try to predict fairly well, whether these populations of wolves will, go after cats or sheep, or what they going to do. So that's interesting.
But I think, we're only at the early stages of starting to map deer.
Yeah.
And stuff like I've never seen a map of sheep density. So, probably the impact on biodiversity of sheep is significant, but there is no public data available on that.
You're doing an excellent job now to pivot into the sheep subject.
Yeah. So there definitely would be an impact of wolf and sheep together if wolf were reintroduced to Wicklow. Absolutely, but I'm not sure how significant that would be, because there are a lot of deer for them to predate as well.
You're of the opinion that we have too many sheep?
Oh, I don't know, because I don't know how many sheep we have. You can tell the state provides data on how many sheep are in each county, and they split them into high sheep, lowland sheep, and then 2 kind of hybrid types. So that's the amount of data that's available. When I last spoke to them, they said from this year, I think the census is done towards Christmas time every year on sheep numbers.
Oh.
Anecdotally, there's less sheep farmers, and sheep farmers are aging. Maybe like we spoke about hunters, they're more an aging population. Sheep farmers are an aging population. I don't know in terms of density, and I don't know what the overall population trend is, but what they have told me is that there will be some better granularity of it, and down to electoral district. So there's, I think, 82 or 83 electoral districts in Wicklow. So you may be able to tell what the density of sheep is in a particular area, and then start to, do some modeling on the impact on biodiversity. I think what I'd like to see is I'd like to see mapping on sheep, deer, rhododendron, which I think is it's almost like it's a coming issue in Wicklow, but nobody's really addressing it. And if we leave it for the next generations, I think it's going to be,
twice as bad.
It's going to be twice as bad. Yeah. So if we start dealing with it now, I think that would be a good idea, but we haven't done that in other places. So, but yeah, I do think rhododendron and cherry laurel in Wicklow is going to be a problem, because, and particularly along the watercourses where it really shouldn't be, because nothing can grow underneath it. It is pretty toxic stuff. So sorry, yeah, on sheep, I'd like to see the better data and better visibility of where the sheep are. And I'd also like to see some more pilot projects to, see what the alternatives are, and, what conservation opportunities there are. Because obviously it's hard to have sheep and native woodland in the same place.
Yeah.
But with deer, sorry, just to cut across you there.
Yeah, sure.
On native woodland regeneration, which is, I suppose, my thing. I'm very interested in native woodland regeneration. I spend a lot of my time in the small bits of native woodland that we have. And obviously, if there's loads of deer in it, nothing grows. Like, I can take you to, native oak woodlands up near me, and there hasn't been a tree managed to get, above an acorn since the deer population has been what it is. So there's a body of work to be done to fix that woodland and look after that woodland, so that woodland can just stay as it is and regenerate itself, and ideally expand a bit. But if it's completely hemmed in by farmland, by quilcher plantation and so on, obviously it can't move. The woodland is trapped, and then the deer come in and eat everything on the ground. If there are sheep in there as well, obviously it's double whammy in it. It's probably going backwards at a rate of knots. But the alternative is, I've also been in woodland that has, that's completely fenced in and has no herbivores in it at all. And that doesn't seem good either.
Yeah.
The brambles and everything grow up and you can't even walk through it. It just seems, you can go too far the other way. So I think there's a kind of happy medium. And, there's a beautiful piece of woodland. I'll take you to Tommy when you're up next, and it follows a watercourse, and it's fenced. And I took Pádraic up there recently. I know you've had a few podcasts with Pádraic, and I think he was pretty impressed with that bit of woodland. And we were able to walk through a few trails in it because there was deer in it. And when the deer fences have come down, the landowner is an older gentleman, and I ring him and he gets the deer fences fixed, or if the small bits, I'll fix them myself. But I was chatting to the landowner about, he was going, oh, because I'm getting on a bit now, I can't even walk through the woods because they're getting too overgrown. And when the deer get in, they basically open it up a little bit. So there's a bit of a balance. I think deer should be in woodland, but not in massive densities. So if that woodland has a plan, and it's a controlled deer population, then fine. But if there's pressures in the surrounding area that put all the deer on that whole mountainside into that woodland, because it's the only decent habitat in town, then obviously, they're just going to, wreck that woodland. Yeah. So I think.
So sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
To stay in the spirit of the episode, there's episode number 20 and 68 with Pádraic Fogarty when we talk about Irish wildlife trophies in general, and 68 when we talk about rewilding and all those kind of issues that you talk about right now. But listen, Ashley. But in general, are you on the opinion that if you I run that survey one day on Twitter and Instagram. When you see the hillside, you think, oh, what a beautiful landscape, or you think it's a wet desert, overgrazed, wrecked habitat and all that? Which one is the dominant feeling?
I suppose in Wicklow, the state-owned bit is the biggest challenge, let's say, because there's nothing there. It is, it is the pits. Yeah. And it's not just like we can talk about it in another time, but the blanket bog takes up a huge amount of the uplands, and that's just wrecked. So I think we need to start looking at the blanket bog issue if we are to look at the conservation of the uplands. We need to look at the trees which tend to follow the river valleys, the watercourses, and where farmers in and around the national park have put in their own, conservation programs. But there are a couple of small charities and trusts that have done a couple of small projects, but there's nothing significant at the moment in terms of, native woodland regeneration, conservation.
It seems like
it's just not happening at the moment. There are some great spots, but there's so few of them. It's kind of a pity.
Yeah, it seems like a grassroots organizations are doing the best job, like a local angling club, local farmer. They do these little spots that
there's loads of little spots like that, and one of the things we're trying to do with the Alvies and the Rewilding Wicklow project is to map all those little spots and to start to articulate them and provide points of contact. So if you want to find out what's happening with the Wolfgang Forestry project down in Ockram, or you want to find out what's happening with the Woodland Trust project in Lara, or you want to help to remove gorse, or whatever that particular project you're interested in, that there's points of contact, because at the moment everybody's kind of doing their own thing. There isn't really a coordinated approach, and it hasn't been properly mapped. Now, partly because it's very difficult to get the maps. I spent on and off for the last 6 months trying to get stuff like the boundaries of the national park. It's a lot of
you would think it's the basic stuff, right?
No, you can't, because there's no electronic file of a lot of the maps you want. So you can get an A4 PDF, but sure, that's no use to man or beast. So trying to get the mapping done, I think, is going to be a body of work. We've got a great guy now from Kilcool, Andrew Stringer, who started working on the GIS. He's a bit of an expert in that area, and he's been looking at what can be done with the mapping and creating a database linked to a map so that we can start to populate it. So when you can see either threats or opportunities, you can start to put them into the map. So we'd be looking at, what data comes out from UCD. Can that be overlaid with sheep data? Can that be overlaid with data on native woodland and fire data? So depending on who you ask, the state either has 21 years or 7 years of fire data. So we can look at, where are the areas that are subject to fire. I know with, I think it was Ciaran Nugent, you did 29. A piece before. Yeah. That was very interesting. I've spoken to him about this before on vegetation management. So
it's such a great episode and such underrated. It was like early days, 29th. And I think that was episode I published first in the new year, like in January. And like almost no one listened to it because like people were still busy. It was like, there was like, I didn't know any better. And but it, like I said, people kind of later on, as the podcast became more popular, people start listening to it, and maybe year in, I got a lot of very good feedback on the 29 with Ciaran, where he just was dropping such a knowledge bombs on forestry, on woodland, on fire management, all this stuff.
See, I think if you just basically leave gorse on the hillside, it's like leaving open cans of petrol. It's going to go on fire eventually.
Especially now with the climate warming and the less rainfall and all that.
Absolutely, but there isn't a vegetation management plan, that goes, okay, let's look at the historic data. Where is the highest risks? It doesn't matter who set those fires. If they were accidental, if they were set by a farmer, if they were set by a bushcrafter, by somebody, with a little portable barbecue. It doesn't matter. Where are they happening? They're always happening in the same places, pretty much. Because gorse tends to follow its, where it's always been, and what can be done to manage that vegetation doesn't mean that that there needs to be a better approach to burning, because
that's what I hear.
There's a lot of machines now that can remove gorse from hillside. So what are the opportunities to resource it to actually put in fire breaks or remove large amounts, to what's it going to be replaced with? There's a lot of issues around vegetation management that I think need to be addressed. I know Wicklow Uplands have a pilot project through SUAS looking at some of those issues. I know Faith Wilson, one of the ecologists who I've suggest maybe is on your Rolodex to call list, talking about some of those upland conservation issues, because I think fire is definitely not going away.
Yeah, and but gorse has a huge is very important from the biodiversity standpoint, and for birds and all the kind of like a basic. So it's very difficult, why would we remove that if it's important?
But I'm not. It's like nobody's talking about removing deer. It's deer management, right? So vegetation management. We're not saying remove all gorse. We might be saying remove all rhododendron.
Yeah, we should.
But you can go to a garden center and buy rhododendron at the moment.
I heard, I only learned recently, it's on 99, a very recent episode, that rhododendron was brought to Ireland for woodcock shooting.
Yeah, I heard that. I don't know. It's certainly
a lot of people came out. I asked that question even before I published the podcast. I asked that question, and a lot of people said, "Yeah, the same happened in UK for shooting for this, that. They were cutting like a not tunnels, but they cutting like a paths through the rhododendron, and that's how they were shooting and so on." But like you said, it's a funny thing, because we have a couple of boar and this is like a big hullabaloo about it. And then you have equally or even more damaging and invasive species like rhododendron. And then you can go to the shop and buy it and put it in your garden.
Yeah. And in Wicklow, there still is a lot of large estates, and they all have rhododendron. And the rhododendron obviously doesn't...
Is it legal? Or is it like, are they not obliged to remove it?
No,
based on the Wildlife Act or something like you?
No. There's no obligation to remove it. And it's I believe
invasive species. It's
but there's no law against planting it or selling it. So there's
that's crazy.
Yeah,
wild boar, which arguably very likely was native, is on the invasive species list for whatever. Like, I don't even want to go for the reasons for that, but it is. And as soon as a couple of boars showed up, National Wildlife Park Service showed up, and then you have a rhododendron, which actually is a problem as an invasive species. And it's like, yeah, I can plant them. You don't have to remove them.
Yeah, it's a body of work. Like, I remember this is years ago, I looked at buying a piece of woodland down in West Cork, and it was at a very good price. And I was like, that's suspiciously cheap. So I went down and I brought one of my buddies who works for Seed Savers, brought him down and said, Cormac, look, what do you think? Come and take a look at this woodland. And, he just back of an envelope kind of priced it up. And he was saying the price to remove and remediate this, it was covered in rhododendron. The price to get this into a good state and remove the rhododendron, it was going to take 3 years of cutting manually. You can't use machines because it breaks it up and it'll spread from the roots and everything else. So you've got to manually cut it back and treat it for 3 years. And the price of doing that was going to cost 3 times the amount of the site.
Yeah, that's why the site was so cheap.
Exactly. So I think there is a body of work, but the longer you leave it to start, the more difficult it's coming. So I think, there's definitely an episode in your next 100 on rhododendron. I absolutely, and probably something on mapping. I know you've had the National Biodiversity Data Center. I'm not sure which episode that was.
Oh, hang on.
But that was a very interesting one. That a lot of the mapping, a lot of the data at the moment seems to be on individual species led stuff rather than general habitat stuff. So I think what we're looking at in Wicklow is, almost more like a bit of a color coding system. We're not sure yet, but putting in something so that you can see more at a glance where the larger threats are, and stepping back from individual species, whether it's, wolves or gooseanders or whatever, I think the underlying, if we can lift the overall habitat quality, then the rivers will benefit. Everything else will. So
I was just looking for it. It's episode 54. National Biodiversity Data Center. When we delve into those,
I think that's worth looking at almost on a quarterly basis. What's happening with mapping. What's happening with the data? How is the data getting into the public domain, and how is the data being put across in a way that everyone understands it? You don't want the data to be produced in these complex shape files that only somebody that has GIS skills can interrogate. I think it has to be something that, anyone can look at a map of their area and go, this is, the threats and opportunities that we're facing locally. And then that's how you get people engaged to do a particular, replanting or rewilding or conservation program.
Going back to fires and rhododendron, this is again what I heard, and then there was in 99, that the recent fires in Killarney, where whatever the cause, whatever started it, that was whatever, was it the barbecue, was it the farmer, I don't know, but there were huge swaths of rhododendron which was poisoned, and it was kind of like, to quote my guest, like a skeletons, and it was and the problem, the bulk of the fire when it started was when the fire got into those rhododendrons, and then that caused this massive fires, like biggest in 20 or 40 years in Killarney, right? Something like that.
You're absolutely right. Like, if rhododendron and laurel burns like coal when it's properly dried. So if you were to, leave it sitting in the air, off the ground for a number of years, and then set a fire beside it, it would, be like covering the mountainside in coal. It burns so hot. So that may be what happened, because, as native woodland doesn't burn very well. Yes.
That we've seen that in Killarney, right? Where is a lot of water.
They have been, and again, I don't know enough about I know there's still an investigation ongoing on that particular fire, but what may have happened is, over the years, the rhododendrons are cut down to ground level, and they're treated with a herbicide for 3 years, and then it dies. It won't recover from that. But if that material is then not removed from the hillside, the fuel load builds up. It's like the fuel load of allowing, like what Ciaran Nugent was talking about. If you let the gorse build up and build up and build up, then the fuel load is increasing. And, I can take you to examples of that in Wicklow, where the gorse is built up under telecom towers. And when that goes on fire, obviously the telecom tower goes on fire. So, there needs to be a plan, I think, to, a triage, let's call it, for those areas. And if things have been done maybe in the past, like leaving large amounts of rhododendron treated, cut, and effectively just left there, then that needs to be addressed, because otherwise it will obviously happen again.
Yeah. Listen, so just to wrap it up, how, in terms of fires, did you think that there should be a reform of the regulations related to fires? And if you were given and mandate and say, like, hey, actually, do it, like, what would you do?
Well, I think the first step will be to get a bit better transparency. So we put in a few PQs recently, parliamentary questions, asking about, a few years ago, the minister said there was a national gorse fire task force. It doesn't appear that there was. That was never set up. There may have been a plan to do so, but it's never been set up. There are some regional and local gorse fire task forces in place, but there's never been a comprehensive policy document to see how you would manage vegetation. It might be worth, this year having Ciaran back to talk about what that policy would look like, because I know he's been looking at how Germany and other countries have been following best practice on vegetation management. So I believe if we wanted, we could have a plan, but I don't believe there is a plan at the moment.
A little bit like with deer management.
Yeah. And I would say a little bit like deer management, or sheep management, vegetation management, any of these issues. First thing is to articulate and map it. And if there is no map of the density, and you can't go, okay, where are the big problems? Is the problem in Killarney? Is the problem in Donegal? Is the problem in Wicklow? The Wicklow problem might be small, and it might be too small to actually address. And we might go, hey, look, yes, it's going to be an issue for the next generation, but we've got a bigger issue in Killarney. Let's fix that. So I think there needs to be some sort of mapping and some sort of triage. Arguably, people will say, and I was chatting to somebody in the Oireachtas about this yesterday. Arguably, agreeing to do a plan or write another report or set up another task force is just pushing it down the road.
Yeah.
And maybe it's better that you decide, okay, it'd be great to have all the data, but actually, while we're doing the data, let's also start. So I kind of am both, I know in other areas what measured gets done, right? So if it was measured, it might get done, but there again, history shows that just because we write a report on it doesn't mean it ever gets implemented, and writing a report can just be to push it along and not actually do anything. So probably there's a bit of both. Let's start, let's resource some of these projects. Let's go, okay, chatting to people on the deer management, it would be something in the region of 40 grand to do, thermal drone project around Wicklow, choose maybe 20, 30, 40 deer hotspots, map them, count the numbers, look at what needs to be done with those areas, do it properly. And to be honest, if we address, Wicklow's the poster child for deer management, isn't it, in the country? So if we came up with a plan for Wicklow, we could extrapolate into other counties, everywhere else, I think would be relatively easier to deal with.
Do you feel like we would need some sort of or whether they would help to have like some sort of a national deer hunters, or hunters in general organization? Well, I know like NRIGC supposed to be that, right? Their Irish chapter of FACE. But I don't I don't feel like there is like a one organization that, if I'm bringing a new hunter to the sport, let's say, I said like, well, go to these folks. They're taking care of hunters' needs. They're out there. They're talking to the media. They're like there is a number of organizations. It feels like everyone does their little thing.
Absolutely, that is exactly what happens. They don't even appear at the top level to talk to each other. So there's lots of different hunter organizations, lots of different rewilding and nature organizations, but they all are their own. They all have their own kind of missions. And yeah, I think to set up another one would be somewhat challenging. There was the Deer Forum, but depending on who you asked, that was disbanded. We actually put in, one of the Green TDs put in a parliamentary question about this last week, and the response was that the Deer Management Forum hasn't been disbanded, but as far as anyone knows, it hasn't met for many years. So it may not have actively been disbanded, but it doesn't actively exist. And arguably they weren't resourced to, tasked to come up with a national deer management plan. So there's a bit of work to be done yet. And, again, depending who you ask, is it better to, do the paperwork or just,
Yeah, and like I had on the episode, it was 71, David Scanlon from FACE, and like FACE is not, unfortunately, it's not an organization for hunters, for individual hunters, and I appreciate they doing excellent job.
Yeah,
at being in the Brussels, walking the corridors, advocating, lobbying, all that, but man, I feel like they should be more engaged with the hunters on the on the ground, and like I said, NRRGC is a kind of a representative, as like a member club that represents FACE in Ireland. But then I heard like maybe a year ago that there was an even AGM held for FACE in Ireland, and this is not good. And like you said, I don't think that setting up yet another organization would help in anything. Because there would be just yet another one that would be competing for members and for money and for everything. There's definitely work to be done on hunter education in Ireland, and how people get into the sport. It can be difficult because you're trying to get your initial permissions, and I might have something coming on that.
Yeah, then once you start and you get your first permissions, it's like then it's just so much easier. But yeah, it can be getting into recreational deer stalking can be difficult for people. And like a few years ago, we had some courses up in Hilltop near me for women on target, to introduce women into shooting, and they were completely oversubscribed. But that was a one-off, and it didn't deal with how you get into deer stalking or whatever. So I think there's definitely opportunities to improve hunter education in Ireland, but there isn't that much at the moment. I've been to a number of good one-off seminars that the different deer associations have run, whether that's on veterinary side. On Ed Hicks has done some brilliant ones on venison butchery. So there has been some really good ones, and the IDC do a monthly online webinar now on elements of deer, and they're really good. I think it's like 15-20 quid a year to join. Definitely you should join the Deer Commission, and you will learn lots about deer, even if you're not a deer stalker. So there is information available, but there isn't an easy path to just go out, get your deer permissions. The paperwork, particularly when you start off, as you know, is a little bit daunting for everyone. And the process of, kind of onboarding as a deer stalker is a little bit more challenging than maybe other types of hunting. But that's the way it is.
And, you touch on the same thing. I had this conversation with my friend maybe 2 years ago, that these deer organization, there's Deer Commission, Wild Deer Association of Ireland, and there's a third one, the name is eluding me right now. They all have these courses, they all have these things. And I was talking with my friend, we were driving down from one of these courses that was pre-COVID, and he goes like, yeah, I'm a member of this one, I'm a member of this one, I'm a member of this one. It's like, it's not cheap, because all of a sudden you're a member of 3 or 4 organizations, 3 or 4 NGOs. Yeah. Right. It's not that great value for money anymore. So yeah, I think we agree on that. That would be great to have.
Well, the IDC is amazing value for money. It's so cheap. For the educational webinars they've had over the last year have been awesome. Like you generally once a month, and they've had some brilliant speakers. So I think that's a good format. But obviously they haven't been able to hold them in person because of the lockdown. But and I think there's now some of the ranges. I know Midlands are starting to open up now, and there's more courses being held there. I think there's actually one this weekend, and one of my buddies is doing something down in Midlands. So I think the hunter education will start opening up again, because certainly in Wicklow, if there is a deer management plan, it's hard to see that it won't involve culling.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't fence the whole of Wicklow, right?
No. Last question. The Wicklow rewilding organization, you mentioned them.
Yeah, that's a kind of grassroots organization. The Alvey brothers set up, and it's looking just at Wicklow, although
how it's called? Rewilding Wicklow?
Rewilding Wicklow, yeah. And it was initially just set up as a kind of response to, I suppose, like myself, the observational side, not so much the science, just going, biodiversity looks like it's under threat in Wicklow. And yeah, I think now the kind of petition that they presented to the minister was 12,000 people, and a lot of people are volunteering and coming forward. Guys like Andrew going, hey, look, I've got GIS skills. Other people have lobbying skills. I'm doing a number of FOIs for them. So getting lots of volunteers involved, identifying projects. Probably the first year is going to be mapping and collecting a lot of the data of who's doing what and where. Because sometimes you hear, oh yeah, there's 4 deer management pilot projects in Wicklow that the Uplands are running, or there's a woodland conservation program down in Ockram, or one up in Lara, or whatever. But who, what, where, all that data is all over the place, and collecting it all together into one place is probably gonna, be a reasonable starting point. And then looking at what's worked well, and hopefully duplicating that. Will be what the program will be. But I'll send you on Danny's details, and maybe that would be one of the next 100.
I ask him a question. I ask you now, like, what's their position? What's their position on wolf?
You'll have to ask Danny about wolves.
Right. I wonder if they're gonna steer well clear on that. Like,
but tell me, give us a sneaky peek anyway into what we've talked about what could be on the next 100 kind of episodes. Saying maybe something on the new Garda Wildlife Crime Unit, maybe something on blanket bogs. I think having it might be challenging to get people to address it, but getting more speakers on the data and mapping side, like
it was a good idea to get Ciaran again.
The data center, definitely. I think that would be good. And then maybe more like the Swedish hunting episode you had, because I'm quite excited now that we're going to go to Sweden in month 41, week 41. What do they call it? Yeah.
Sweden is hunting. I'm just going to quickly find the episode number. Is it 77?
77. Yeah. So I think and 88 was on Rewilding Scotland, and then obviously 95 was my favorite with Martha on Poland.
Yeah. So, really?
Yeah. I thought that was awesome. So probably other comparative studies. I think it would be great to get more people from, what other countries. I'm going to introduce you to some of my Canadian buddies to maybe
I would love that.
To bring in some, what's happening in Canada. Because, every country, particularly with water courses, and the challenges that we're facing with, sea trout and salmon, there's a lot of countries facing similar threats. So I think,
I usually don't reveal what's in the coming episodes, but since it's a 100, it's a special. I might or might not have some stuff coming on marine protected areas.
Yeah,
that's another big thing. So, all I can say, like, I'm working hard to get people involved in the marine protected areas.
And are there any other areas that you've really struggled to find? Are there any topics that people just go, oh, I'll talk to you about that, but I don't want to talk publicly about it? Because
you know what, I found it very interesting in terms of seal and seal conflict.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that been kind of I keep it undercover. I didn't want to get it out, but I think right now I can do that. Is I wanted to shoot a short documentary film on seal conflict and present both sides of the conflict. And man, it's so hard. So we had an episode when I talked with a trawler man. It was episode 78.
Yeah.
And then I had a 72 where I talk with a lady from Seal Rescue Ireland.
Yeah, Mel,
which we kind of purposely left the subject out. But I was reaching to, I tried, maybe COVID get in the way a little bit, but I was trying to talk to, Seal Sanctuary and Seal Rescue Ireland. And Seal Rescue Ireland, through mail, I had like a somewhat of a response. Folks from Seal Sanctuary, they ignored me basically. And I find it hard to understand why people don't want to talk about the problem. It's like, let's talk about the problem. Let's discuss something. And it seems to me like a lot of that boils down to, what is the audience and audience in the sense of NGOs. They have their core audience. And by audience, I mean people who paying the money, who donating.
Yeah.
And they almost don't want to talk about stuff that they know in the fear of upsetting people who are, because like, let's take an example of, let's say, Irish Wildlife Trust, right? And I don't mean want to pick on them.
Yeah.
I love Pádraic Fogarty. He's a great friend of the podcast and they're doing absolutely fantastic job. But I think the fact is that a lot of core audience or members of Irish Wildlife Trust, they're animal loving, to use the stereotype vegan cat ladies, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just using that tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And they're substantial core, and then they know about that, and this is why they're not gonna say like, well, actually, we should get a hunters, work on hunters recruitment to control deer problem. We should, they don't want, they strategically not openly talking about certain things to not upset the audience. And I even saw on Twitter, discussion to farmers, hey, you should join Irish Wildlife Trust because they're doing so much, and farmers not going to do that. And like, because this is not for them, right? Majority of people, not the majority, but the substantial portion of people who are members of Irish Wildlife Trust, they engage online in so-called farmer bashing, right? Like it or not. So farmers, even though there is a common ground, they're not going to join. There's a hostile relation, right? And this is something that, again, was very often on the podcast. And what I feel is a value proposition for the podcast, that I talk to all those different people and say like, hey, let's work on the common ground first. Deal with the common ground first. And because whether animal loving person or you a hunter, you need to have a healthy ecosystem. You both want the same thing. Let's work on the same thing, right? And once you work on the same thing, I'm going to repeat the same thing that I'm going to say in one of the coming episodes. But hey, it's important, right? If we work on common ground first, even if we have differences, even if one side thinks that we should shoot the deer and eat them, and the other side thinks that the deer is awesome and have long lashes, let's find the common ground and work on the common ground first to have a healthy ecosystem. We both want that. And while we work together, we get to know each other better. The both sides start to understand each other better. Not only they will achieve where a common ground is, then they're in a much better position to work out their differences because they understand each other better. And this is what is upsetting to me sometimes. And at the same time, I feel like this is what I do here on the podcast, presenting those different points of view, which, by the way, I'm getting heat from both sides from time to time. But at least like, hey, let's try to acknowledge common ground. Let's try to push together where we think the same things. And we deal with it, differences later on once we achieve something.
Yeah, I think it's the same with, a lot of the NGOs that are getting involved with planting woodland. They often don't have a deer management plan. I'm like, how can you not have a deer management plan? You're planting woodland in a deer hotspot in the Wicklow Uplands, and you don't have a plan. That, to me, is crazy. And maybe there is an element of it that the reason why they don't have a plan is because they feel their stakeholders won't want to talk about culling deer. But then you look at, say, a lot of the bird conservation programs, like the one in Kilcool. Obviously, if you didn't cull grey crows and foxes and mink, you couldn't have that colony there. Mm-hmm. So,
yes,
the it's maybe the human wildlife conflict, as a couple of the episodes called it, is core to some of these, unless the state just goes, look, if you're involved in woodland conservation, or you're accepting public donations to plant trees or whatever, you have to have a written deer management plan. That's the rules. So then they just go, oh, we have no choice. The state mandate that. It's the right thing.
But like a state is also kind of susceptible to, winds, like where is the popularity, what people want, because they always think, we know about that's what people want, right? Like you see in the UK, what's going on, the whole trophy hunting, import, export, all that conversation. It has very little with the factual evidence-based data. It is all about perceptions and campaigns and what people like, and like, oh shit, I better not say anything about seal calling, or oh shit, because coming the election, some Facebook account will unleash the shitstorm and I'm done, and then I'm not electable, and then I'm gonna get crossed through, so it'll be awesome if we were driven by evidence, by data, by all those things, and not by emotions. And unfortunately, I think there's so much emotions involved. And this is what you're saying. Like, how can you not have a deer management plan if you're planting woodland?
Yeah,
like it literally. But
at the moment, the reality is today, you don't have to have.
Oh yeah, but
or it can be on paper, but there's no implementation, and you can basically become a deer sanctuary.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Native woodland sanctuaries plus deer sanctuaries.
Yeah. But look, I think we've covered a wide kind of range. They're the areas maybe that are, and if you spoke to somebody in Kerry or Donegal, maybe they would have a different approach because their observations may be different. My observations are coming from somebody, spent the last 20 years up in the Wicklow Uplands. So I have, my perspective, as I say, it's not always backed up by the science, but where possible, I try and, find the experts, speak to them. I found, luckily I found, this podcast that has a lot of the experts all collected together, which is kind of really handy. Sometimes I felt, I was just like following up and, I just maybe, spoken to about half the people over the last few years, because it's, certainly when you're talking about people that are interested in hunting, interested in conservation, interested in, marine conservation, particularly the, river issues and salmon and sea trout, that I think you've done a great job in, pulling together lots of people. And maybe let's see what the next 100 episodes bring, and we'll catch up for 200.
Oh yeah, Ashley, thank you so much for that. It's been great. I appreciate your time and appreciate this conversation. I'm sure people will take a lot from that, and I'm going to put all the episodes that we mentioned in the show notes so people can reference them and see it. And are there any words of wisdom you would like to leave our listeners with?
No, I'm sure we've missed lots of episodes, and again, because of where I'm based in my own areas of interest, I've picked on ones that tend to deal with upland ecology or forestry generation or deer. But there's lots of other stuff, that I'd like to mention, like the Cork lad that was talking about Ray or Skate. That was
yes.
one of my favorites. I think that was amazing.
I need to find that one.
He's a guy that I just really enjoyed listening to him. He's the kind of guy I'd love to just go fishing, go for a pint with him.
81. That's an episode 81. Skates and marine rewilding.
Yeah. So I do have some kind of favorites that I probably will listen to again.
And you're right. We need to caveat that the episodes that we mentioned, this is why we mentioned it. That doesn't mean that the other episodes are worse or not as good. It just happened that in this conversation, we picked up on those from the perspective of, your work, where you live and what your interests are.
Exactly. So I think if you were talking to somebody that was coming at it from more recreational angling or from a different part of the country, they might have a different perspective, on it. So, yeah, I think I'm just looking through my notes there. I think that was probably, there's a few other ones that, we could probably pull out to talk about. But I think we've covered a lot of the ones that have a kind of Wicklow or an uplands ecology impact. So I think, we've done a good recap there. Listen, thank you very much, Tommy.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.